The sound of a shotgun blast shattered the quiet Montana evening, silencing the crowd that had gathered in front of the Millstone family's modest homestead. Margaret Millstone stood trembling on the porch, her father's hunting rifle still smoking in her hands, the bullet having struck the ground inches from Jeremiah Flint's weathered boots. The 60-year-old drunkard stumbled backward, his rheumy eyes wide with shock, as whiskey sloshed from the bottle clutched in his gnarled hand. "I will not marry him, father. I would sooner die," Margaret declared, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her dirt-smudged cheeks. The year was 1878, and at 21, Margaret had just become the talk of Copper Creek. Thomas Millstone's face flushed crimson as he lunged forward, wrenching the rifle from his daughter's hands. "You'll do as you're told, girl. The debt must be paid, and Flint has generously offered to take you as payment." Behind the gathered onlookers, a lone figure astride a dappled gray stallion watched the scene unfold with growing concern. Beau Jackson had only been in Copper Creek for 3 days, having ridden in with a herd of cattle from Texas. But something about the fiery young woman on that porch stirred something deep within him. Margaret's mother had died 5 years earlier, leaving her to care for her father and 3 younger siblings. The drought had been merciless, and Thomas Millstone's growing fondness for cards and whiskey had driven their once prosperous ranch to the brink of ruin. Jeremiah Flint owned half the businesses in town, including the saloon where Thomas had accumulated his substantial debt. "The wedding will be Sunday after church," Thomas announced, his grip tight on Margaret's arm as he dragged her back toward the house. "Be grateful someone wants you at all, girl." The crowd began to disperse, some murmuring in disapproval, others laughing at the spectacle. Flint took a long pull from his bottle before staggering toward his waiting carriage, a self-satisfied grin splitting his weather-beaten face. Beau dismounted, tethering his horse to a nearby post, before approaching one of the departing townspeople. "Pardon me, madam," he said, tipping his hat to an older woman who had watched the scene with obvious distaste. "Might I ask what's happening here?" The woman sighed, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. That poor girl. Her father's gambling has finally caught up with him. And now he's selling his oldest daughter to that vile Flint to clear his debts. It's a disgrace. Beau's jaw tightened as he gazed at the house where Margaret had disappeared. "Doesn't seem right," he said quietly. "Nothing about it is right, young man," the woman replied. "But that's how things go when a man values liquor over his own flesh and blood." As night fell over Copper Creek, Margaret sat by her bedroom window, staring out at the stars that seemed to mock her with their freedom. Her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying, her hands raw from where she'd punched the wall in frustration. 3 days. She had 3 days before she would be forced to marry a man old enough to be her grandfather. A man whose breath reeked of stale whiskey, and whose hands wandered inappropriately whenever he came to collect on her father's debts. A soft tap at her window startled her from her grim thoughts. Cautiously, she pushed it open, surprised to find a tall stranger standing below, his hat in his hands. "Miss Millstone?" he whispered. "Name's Beau Jackson. I saw what happened earlier. I'd like to help, if you'll let me." Margaret narrowed her eyes suspiciously. "How could you possibly help me? And why would you?" "Because no one should be traded like cattle," Beau replied simply. "I've got a horse and enough supplies to get you to the next town. From there, you could catch a train east, maybe find work in one of the bigger cities." Hope flickered briefly in Margaret's heart before reality crushed it. "I can't leave my siblings. Father would only punish them for my absence, and who knows what he might do to my youngest sister when she comes of age." Beau considered this, his brow furrowed in thought. "Then we need a different plan. Meet me behind the smithy tomorrow at noon. We'll figure something out." Before Margaret could respond, a floorboard creaked in the hallway outside her room. She quickly shut the window and dove into bed, feigning sleep as her father checked on her one final time. The next morning, Margaret rose early, completing her chores with mechanical efficiency. Her mind was racing, considering and discarding various plans for escape. Could she trust the stranger? Beau Jackson seemed sincere, but she had learned the hard way that men's promises were as substantial as morning mist. At precisely noon, Margaret slipped away from the house, making her way to the blacksmith shop on the pretense of having her father's horseshoes repaired. Behind the smithy, Beau waited, accompanied by an older man with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed white beard. "Miss Millstone, this is Judge Samuel Wilson," Beau introduced. "He's the circuit judge passing through town today." The judge tipped his hat respectfully. "Mr. Jackson here tells me you're being forced into a marriage against your will, young lady. Is that correct?" Margaret nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "My father lost a great deal of money to Mr. Flint. He's offered to forgive the debt if I marry him." Judge Wilson frowned deeply. "While arranged marriages aren't uncommon, coercion of this nature is troubling. Unfortunately, as your father is your legal guardian until you marry, there's little I can do officially unless you can prove mistreatment." Margaret's shoulders slumped in defeat. "Then I truly have no options." "I didn't say that," the judge replied with a small smile. "The law has limitations, but sometimes justice requires creativity. Mr. Jackson here has proposed an interesting solution." Beau stepped forward, his expression determined. "Miss Millstone, if you were already promised to another man, your father couldn't legally force you to marry Flint." Margaret stared at him in confusion. "But I'm not promised to anyone." "You could be," Beau said quietly. "To me." Margaret's eyes widened in shock. "You're suggesting I marry you instead? A complete stranger? How is that any better than my current predicament?" "Not marry," Beau clarified. "Just a formal engagement, witnessed by the judge here. It would buy us time to find a permanent solution, and unlike Flint, I have no intention of holding you to it if you choose to break it off later." Judge Wilson nodded. "It's a legal binding that would supersede your father's arrangement, especially with my endorsement. Mr. Jackson has also offered to pay off your father's debt to remove Flint's leverage." Margaret's head spun with the implications. "You would do that? Pay off our debt? Why?" Beau shifted uncomfortably. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people are forced into bad situations. I can't stand by and watch it happen again, not when I have the means to stop it." Margaret studied him carefully, tall and lean, with honest blue eyes and calloused hands that spoke of hard work rather than gambling. Beau Jackson was undeniably handsome, but more importantly, there was a kindness in his expression that she hadn't seen directed at her in a very long time. "And if I agree to this charade, what happens afterward?" she asked cautiously. "Whatever you want," Beau assured her. "You can break the engagement once the dust settles, or—" He trailed off, a flush creeping up his neck. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. "I believe what Mr. Jackson is attempting to say, rather poorly, is that you would have the option of continuing the engagement if you found yourselves compatible. But that would be entirely your decision, Miss Millstone." Margaret took a deep breath, weighing her limited options. "How quickly can we arrange this?" The rest of the day passed in a blur of activity. Judge Wilson accompanied Margaret home, where he informed a stunned Thomas Millstone that his daughter had entered into a formal engagement with Beau Jackson, a cattle rancher with substantial holdings in Texas. When Thomas began to protest, the judge firmly reminded him that breaking a legally witnessed engagement would result in significant penalties. "Furthermore," the judge added, "Mr. Jackson has generously offered to settle your outstanding debt with Mr. Flint as a gesture of goodwill toward his future father-in-law." Thomas Millstone's anger quickly transformed into the calculating interest. "How generous," he said, eyeing Beau with new respect. "And how much might these substantial holdings be worth, exactly?" Beau met the older man's gaze steadily. "Enough that I won't be gambling them away any time soon, sir." The barb hit its mark, and Thomas's face darkened momentarily before he forced a smile. "Well then, congratulations are in order. When's the wedding to be?" "We haven't set a date," Margaret interjected quickly. "Beau must return to Texas to arrange his affairs before we can proceed with the wedding plans." "And how long might that take?" Thomas pressed, clearly concerned about losing his newfound source of potential income. Beau placed a protective hand on Margaret's shoulder. "Not long. I'll need to ensure everything is in order at the ranch before bringing my bride home. Perhaps 6 months?" "6 months?" Thomas exploded. "That's ridiculous. The girl can be ready to travel in a week." "Father!" Margaret protested, genuinely horrified. Judge Wilson cleared his throat. 6 months seems a reasonable time frame for a man to prepare his home for a new bride, Mr. Millstone, and it would give the young couple time to better acquaint themselves through correspondence." Thomas grudgingly agreed, though his displeasure was evident. As soon as the arrangements were finalized, Beau departed to find Jeremiah Flint and settle the debt, leaving Margaret to face her father's suspicions alone. "Where did you find this cowboy?" Thomas demanded once the judge had left. "And don't tell me it was love at first sight. I know you better than that, girl." Margaret lifted her chin defiantly. "Does it matter? You were ready to sell me to a drunkard old enough to be my grandfather. At least Beau is young and sober." Thomas raised his hand as if to strike her, then thought better of it. "Just remember, if this falls through, Flint will still be waiting, and he won't be nearly as forgiving the second time around." Later that evening, as Margaret prepared supper for her siblings, a commotion outside drew her attention. Peering through the window, she saw Beau confronting Jeremiah Flint outside the saloon, a small crowd gathering to watch. Though she couldn't hear their words, the tension in Beau's posture was unmistakable. Jeremiah Flint was known for his volatile temper, especially when drinking, which was most of the time. As the town's wealthiest resident, he was used to getting his way, and being denied Margaret as his bride would not sit well with him. Margaret hurriedly instructed her younger brother to watch the stew, then slipped out the back door, making her way toward the confrontation. As she drew closer, she could hear Flint's slurred objections. "You can't just ride into town and claim what's mine," the older man was shouting, jabbing a finger into Beau's chest. "I paid good money for that girl." Beau remained calm, though his eyes had taken on a dangerous gleam. "Miss Millstone isn't property to be bought or sold, Mr. Flint. She's a person with her own mind and heart." Flint spat on the ground. "Heart? What does a heart matter? A woman needs security, and I was offering plenty of that." "Along with your drunken rages and wandering hands?" Beau countered, causing several townspeople to murmur in agreement. It seemed Flint's reputation was well known. Flint's face contorted with fury as he reached for the pistol at his hip. "You insolent pup!" "I'll teach you to—" "I wouldn't," came a steady voice as Sheriff Mills stepped through the crowd, his own weapon already drawn. "Seems to me this matter's already been settled legally, Jeremiah. Judge Wilson himself witnessed the engagement." Flint glared at the sheriff, then at Beau, before finally noticing Margaret standing at the edge of the crowd. "This isn't over," he hissed, holstering his weapon, not by a long shot. As Flint staggered back into the saloon, Beau approached Margaret, concern evident in his expression. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Millstone. It's not safe." Margaret lifted her chin. "This is my life we're discussing. I have every right to be present." A smile tugged at the corner of Beau's mouth. "Fair enough. I've settled your father's debt with Flint, but as you can see, he's not taking the news well." "He never does," Margaret replied softly. "Thank you for what you're doing, Mr. Jackson. I know it's a tremendous imposition." "Beau," he corrected gently, "if we're supposedly engaged, you should probably use my given name." Margaret nodded, a blush warming her cheeks. "Beau, then, and you should call me Margaret." The next few days saw a strange routine develop. Beau took a room at the town's small hotel, spending his days helping at the Millstone Ranch and his evenings escorting Margaret on short walks through town, carefully establishing their courtship for all to see. Thomas Millstone watched these developments with suspicion, but said nothing, too grateful for the influx of cash from Beau's settlement of his gambling debts. Margaret's younger siblings Eliza, who was 16, William, who was 12, and little Sarah, who had just turned 8, were initially wary of Beau, but quickly warmed to him when he brought them candies from the general store and showed William how to properly throw a lasso. A week into their charade, Margaret found Beau repairing the ranch's sagging fence, his shirt discarded in the summer heat, revealing a torso tanned and muscled from years of hard work. She paused, momentarily transfixed, before clearing her throat to announce her presence. Beau turned, quickly retrieving his shirt and pulling it on. "Margaret," he greeted her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Is everything all right?" She nodded, offering him the canteen of water she'd brought. "Yes, I just thought you might be thirsty." As he drank gratefully, she added, "You don't have to do this, you know. Fix the fence, I mean. Our arrangement doesn't require you to actually work the ranch." Beau handed back the canteen, their fingers brushing briefly. "I don't mind. Keeps my hands busy while I figure out our next steps." "Have you?" Margaret asked hopefully. "Figured out next steps, I mean." Beau sighed, leaning against the newly repaired fence post. "I've been thinking about it. The simplest solution would be for you and your siblings to come back to Texas with me. My ranch is doing well, and there's plenty of room. Margaret's heart skipped a beat at the suggestion. All of us? But why would you do that? Beau met her gaze steadily. Because it's the right thing to do. Your father's not going to change, Margaret. Even with his debts paid, he'll just accumulate more. And Flint's not a man who forgives easily. As long as you stay here, you'll all be at risk. But taking on 4 additional people is a massive responsibility, Margaret protested. And what about our arrangement? People would expect us to actually marry. A flush crept up Beau's neck. We could maintain the engagement for propriety's sake while you get settled. After that, if you wanted to break it off, I'd understand completely. Margaret studied him carefully, searching for any sign of deception. And if I didn't want to break it off, I mean? Beau's eyes widened slightly, a smile tugging at his lips. Well, that would be fine too. Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Turning, they saw a group of riders approaching the ranch, led by Jeremiah Flint, whose face was flushed with either anger or alcohol, possibly both. Get back to the house, Beau instructed Margaret, his expression grim. Lock the door and keep everyone inside. Margaret hesitated. Beau, please, he urged. I can handle Flint, but I need to know you're safe. Reluctantly, Margaret hurried back to the house, gathering her siblings in the front room while keeping watch through the window. Outside, Flint and his men, 4 rough-looking cowboys who worked at his cattle operation, confronted Beau near the fence line. Thought you could humiliate me, boy? Flint shouted, his words slightly slurred. Nobody takes what's mine and lives to brag about it. Beau stood his ground, one hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. Miss Millstone was never yours to begin with, Flint. Your debt's been paid. You have no claim here anymore. Flint spat on the ground. Money don't erase insult, cowboy. You've made me a laughingstock in this town, and I aim to correct that. By doing what? Beau challenged. Attacking an unarmed man on his fiancée's property? That'll surely restore your reputation. One of Flint's men laughed, earning a venomous glare from his employer. Shut your mouth, Peters, and you. Flint turned back to Beau. I'm challenging you proper. Tomorrow at noon, outside the saloon. Bring your gun and whatever passes for courage in Texas. Beau's expression remained impassive. I don't duel, Flint. I'm not interested in killing you or getting killed over your wounded pride. Then I'll have to motivate you, Flint snarled, nodding to his men. 2 of them dismounted and started toward the house. In a flash, Beau's gun was drawn, his earlier casualness replaced by deadly focus. Take one more step toward that house, and you won't live long enough to regret it. The men hesitated, looking to Flint for direction. The older man scowled, clearly recognizing the genuine threat in Beau's stance. Noon tomorrow, Jackson. Be there, or I'll burn this ranch to the ground with everyone inside it. With that, Flint wheeled his horse around and galloped away, his men following close behind. Only when they were out of sight did Beau holster his weapon, his shoulders sagging slightly as the tension left his body. Margaret rushed out of the house, her face pale with worry. You can't duel him, Beau. Flint's known for shooting men in the back when he's losing. He's killed 3 men that way already, but no one can prove it. Beau's jaw tightened. I suspected as much, but if I don't show, he'll make good on his threat about the ranch. Then we need to leave, Margaret decided, her voice firm despite her trembling hands. All of us tonight. We can pack quickly and be gone before dawn. Beau shook his head. Running won't solve this, Margaret. Flint would just hunt us down, and your father would suffer the consequences in the meantime. My father brought this on himself, Margaret replied bitterly. Maybe so, Beau conceded, but your siblings don't deserve to be uprooted in the middle of the night, fleeing like criminals. Margaret knew he was right, though it didn't make the situation any less terrifying. Then what do we do? Beau considered the question carefully. I think it's time I had a conversation with Sheriff Mills, and perhaps another with your father. We need allies, Margaret, not just plans for escape. That evening, after a tense dinner during which Thomas Millstone remained suspiciously absent, Beau met with Sheriff Mills at the town jail. The lawman listened gravely to Beau's account of Flint's challenge, his weathered face growing increasingly troubled. Flint's dangerous, the sheriff confirmed once Beau had finished. "But he's also the most powerful man in Copper Creek. Half the town owes him money or favors, including 3 members of the town council." "And you?" Beau asked directly. Sheriff Mills smiled grimly. "I owe him nothing except a jail cell if he ever breaks the law where I can prove it. Problem is, he's careful. The duels are technically legal mutual combat and all that, and the accusations about him shooting men in the back have never stuck." Beau leaned forward, lowering his voice. "What if we could catch him planning something illegal, like burning down the Millstone ranch?" The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "That would certainly be enough to arrest him, but Flint's not stupid enough to discuss such plans where they might be overheard. Unless he thought he was speaking privately to someone he trusts," Beau suggested. "Someone like Thomas Millstone, who might be persuaded that getting rid of me would allow him to still profit from his daughter's marriage to Flint." Understanding dawned on the sheriff's face. "You think Millstone would cooperate?" "For the right price," Beau confirmed grimly, "and to protect his own skin. If Flint burns down the ranch, Thomas loses everything. But if he helps Flint get rid of me quietly, he stands to gain." Sheriff Mills stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "It's risky." "Millstone's not known for his discretion, especially when he's been drinking. Which is precisely why Flint might trust him enough to reveal his plans," Beau pointed out. "We just need to ensure Thomas is sober enough to remember what to say, and that we're listening when Flint responds." As they worked out the details of their plan, Margaret paced nervously in her bedroom, torn between fear for Beau's safety and a growing realization of just how much her feelings toward him had evolved in the short time they'd known each other. What had begun as gratitude had blossomed into something deeper, something that made her heart race whenever he smiled at her. The sound of the front door opening drew her attention. Peering out her bedroom door, she saw her father stumbling in, reeking of whiskey as usual. But instead of heading straight to bed, he paused, seeming to listen for something. Satisfied that the house was quiet, he moved to the small desk in the corner of the front room and began rummaging through the drawer. Curious, Margaret crept closer, staying in the shadows of the hallway. To her horror, she watched as her father withdrew the deed to their ranch and stuffed it inside his jacket. He was going to gamble away what little they had left. Without thinking, Margaret stepped into the room. "What are you doing with that deed, Father?" Thomas Millstone jumped, his bloodshot eyes widening with guilt before narrowing in anger. "None of your business, girl. Go back to bed." "It is my business when you're about to lose the roof over our heads," Margaret retorted, her fear giving way to righteous fury. "Haven't you caused enough damage already?" Thomas advanced on her, his expression darkening. "You ungrateful little—" He raised his hand to strike her, but Margaret stood her ground, unflinching. "Go ahead," she challenged quietly. "Hit me. Show me exactly why I should trust your judgment about anything, let alone my future." Thomas's hand wavered, then slowly lowered. For a moment, something like shame crossed his features before he masked it with defiance. "You don't understand. Flint offered me a deal. If I help him get rid of that cowboy of yours, he'll forgive the rest of my debts and still take you as his wife. It's a good arrangement, Margaret. Better than running off with some Texas drifter who'll probably abandon you first chance he gets." Margaret felt sick to her stomach. "You'd sell your own daughter twice? And help murder an innocent man? Have you no decency left at all?" Thomas looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "It's not murder, just helping justice along. Flint says your cowboy cheated him somehow, that the money he used to pay my debt was actually stolen from Flint's safe. He deserves what's coming to him." "That's a lie," Margaret said firmly. "Beau Jackson is an honorable man, which is more than I can say for you, or Jeremiah Flint. If you do this, Father, I will never forgive you. Never." For a long moment, Thomas stared at her, something unreadable in his expression. Then, with a muttered curse, he thrust the deed back into the drawer. "Fine. Throw your life away with this stranger. But when he leaves you high and dry, don't come crawling back to me." As Thomas stumbled toward his bedroom, Margaret sank into a chair. Her legs suddenly too weak to support her. She needed to warn Beau that Flint was planning something beyond a simple duel. But how could she leave the house at this hour without risking her reputation or alerting her father? The answer came in the form of a soft tap at the window. Looking up, she saw Beau standing outside, concern evident in his expression. Quickly, she moved to let him in. "I was coming to speak with your father," Beau explained in a whisper. "Sheriff Mills and I have a plan, but we need—" "My father is working with Flint," Margaret cut him off, her voice urgent. "Flint's convinced him that you stole the money you used to pay his debt, and he's planning something more than just a duel." Beau's eyes narrowed. "I suspected as much. Flint doesn't strike me as the type to fight fair." "He isn't," Margaret confirmed. "What was your plan with the sheriff?" Beau quickly outlined their strategy to trap Flint into incriminating himself. "But if your father's already aligned with Flint, that complicates things." Margaret thought for a moment. "Not necessarily. My father's primary motivation is money. If he believes helping you would be more profitable than helping Flint, he might be persuaded to change sides again." "You're suggesting we bribe your own father?" Beau asked, clearly troubled by the notion. Margaret's expression hardened. "I'm suggesting we use his greed against him, just as Flint is doing. The difference is, our cause is just." After further discussion, they refined their plan. Beau would offer Thomas a substantial sum to act as their informant instead of Flint's accomplice. With Thomas feeding false information to Flint while secretly reporting the older man's plans back to them, they could stay one step ahead while gathering the evidence the sheriff needed to arrest Flint legally. The next morning, Beau approached Thomas Millstone as the older man nursed his hangover with coffee on the porch. "Mr. Millstone, I'd like to discuss a business proposition with you." Thomas eyed him suspiciously. "What kind of proposition?" "The profitable kind," Beau replied, taking a seat beside him. "I understand Flint has made you an offer regarding me. I'd like to make a counteroffer." Thomas's bloodshot eyes narrowed. "How did you know about that?" "It doesn't matter," Beau said dismissively. "What matters is that Flint can't offer you what I can." "And what's that?" Thomas asked. Interest clearly piqued despite his wariness. Beau named a sum that made Thomas's eyes widen appreciably. "That's twice what I owe Flint now." "Yes," Beau agreed. "And all you need to do to earn it is tell me exactly what Flint is planning, then feed him whatever information I give you." Thomas stroked his stubbled chin thoughtfully. "And if he catches on?" "Sheriff Mills will ensure your protection," Beau assured him. "And once Flint is dealt with, you'll have enough money to start fresh somewhere else, if that's what you want." After several minutes of negotiation, Thomas agreed to the arrangement, though Margaret, watching from inside the house, remained skeptical of her father's trustworthiness. Nevertheless, by mid-morning, Thomas had met with Flint and returned with valuable information. "He's not planning to face you fairly at noon," Thomas reported, accepting the glass of whiskey Beau offered him as they sat in the sheriff's office. "He's got 2 men positioned on the roof of the general store with rifles. The moment you step into the street, they'll shoot you down. Flint will claim self-defense, saying you drew first." Sheriff Mills cursed under his breath. Classic Flint. Always has a backup plan. Beau nodded grimly. "Then we need to adjust our strategy. Thomas, here's what I want you to tell Flint." As noon approached, tension gripped the small town of Copper Creek. Word of the impending duel had spread quickly, drawing a crowd of curious onlookers, despite the sheriff's attempts to keep people indoors. Storekeepers closed early, and mothers hustled children inside, sensing the dangerous atmosphere. Margaret stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, her heart pounding painfully in her chest, as she watched Beau check his pistol one final time. "You don't have to do this," she said softly. "We could still leave." Beau holstered his weapon, then turned to face her fully. "If we run now, Flint will never stop hunting us. This ends today, one way or another." "And if something goes wrong?" Margaret asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Beau stepped closer, reaching out to gently touch her cheek. "Then know that these past days with you have been worth whatever comes next." Before Margaret could respond, Beau leaned down and kissed her softly. It was brief but filled with promise, and when he pulled away, Margaret felt as though her whole world had shifted on its axis. "For luck," Beau explained with a small smile before turning to the sheriff. "Ready?" Sheriff Mills nodded, his expression solemn. "Deputies are in position. Remember, let Flint make the first move. We need to catch him red-handed." As Beau stepped out into the dusty street, Margaret whispered a prayer, her hand unconsciously rising to touch her lips, where Beau's had been moments before. The scene unfolded exactly as they had anticipated. Flint emerged from the saloon, flanked by two of his men, while two others were indeed positioned on the rooftops, rifles at the ready. Thomas Millstone stood nervously to one side, pretending to encourage Flint while actually watching for the sheriff's signal. "You showed up," Flint called out, his voice carrying across the now silent street. "Didn't think you had the spine for it." "Texas?" Beau stood calmly, hands at his sides, deliberately keeping them away from his holster. "I'm here, Flint. Let's end this nonsense peacefully. There's no need for bloodshed." Flint laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Oh, there's gonna be blood, all right. Yours, all over this street." "Is that a threat?" Beau asked loudly, giving the sheriff's deputies the cue they needed. Simultaneously, they appeared on the rooftops behind Flint's snipers, weapons trained on the would-be assassins. Flint's confidence faltered as he realized something had gone wrong. "What the— Jeremiah Flint," Sheriff Mills announced, stepping into the street with his rifle raised. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and intimidation of the townspeople of Copper Creek." Flint's face contorted with rage as he realized he'd been betrayed. His eyes darted to Thomas Millstone, who took a nervous step backward. You sold me out, you worthless drunk!" Before anyone could react, Flint drew his pistol and fired at Thomas. The shot went wide, splintering the wooden post beside Thomas's head. In the next instant, Beau's gun was in his hand, firing a single precise shot that struck Flint's shoulder, causing him to drop his weapon with a howl of pain. The sheriff's deputies quickly disarmed Flint's men, who surrendered without resistance once they saw their employer was wounded and captured. As Flint was dragged away, cursing and threatening everyone in sight, Margaret rushed to Beau's side, throwing her arms around him in relief. "It's over," Beau murmured into her hair, holding her tightly. "He can't hurt you anymore." In the weeks that followed, Copper Creek underwent a transformation. With Flint imprisoned awaiting trial, his various businesses and properties were temporarily placed under the management of the bank. Many of the debts he had held over the townspeople were renegotiated or forgiven entirely, as evidence emerged of Flint's systematic intimidation and corruption. Thomas Millstone, shaken by his near-death experience, made a surprising announcement at Sunday dinner 1 week after the confrontation. "I'm selling the ranch," he declared, avoiding his children's startled gazes. "Got an offer from a family moving west from Pennsylvania. Good people, willing to pay fair price." "But where will we go?" Eliza asked, glancing worriedly at her siblings. Thomas cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, that's the thing. I'm heading to California. There's gold still being found there, and I aim to try my luck." "Without us," Margaret stated flatly, already knowing the answer. Thomas had the grace to look ashamed. "You kids deserve better than what I've given you. The money from the ranch sale will be held in trust for the younger ones until they come of age. As for you, Margaret—" He hesitated, then continued gruffly. "That cowboy of yours seems decent enough. If you're still set on marrying him, you have my blessing, for whatever that's worth." Margaret was stunned by this unexpected abdication of responsibility, though not entirely surprised. Her father had always chosen the path of least resistance when it came to family obligations. "And who will care for Eliza, William, and Sarah while you're off chasing gold?" Before Thomas could respond, Beau spoke up from his place at the table. "I believe I might have a solution, if everyone's agreeable." All eyes turned to him expectantly. Beau had been a steady presence at the Millstone home since the confrontation with Flint, helping with repairs and spending increasing amounts of time with Margaret, their pretend engagement gradually evolving into something genuine. "My ranch in Texas has plenty of room for everyone," Beau continued. "Margaret and I could marry before we leave, making the children legally our responsibility. They'd have a stable home, good education, and plenty of fresh air and sunshine." Thomas nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to have his abandonment sanctioned so neatly. The younger children, already fond of Beau, seemed excited by the prospect of a new adventure, but Margaret remained silent, her expression unreadable. Later that evening, as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name, Margaret finally addressed Beau's proposal. "Did you mean what you said about marrying before we leave? Or was that just to appease my father and provide for my siblings?" Beau stopped walking, turning to face her fully in the fading light. "Margaret, nothing about my feelings for you has been pretend, not for a long time now. I would have asked properly, with a ring and on bended knee, if your father hadn't forced my hand at dinner. Margaret searched his face, finding only sincerity in his clear blue eyes. But we've known each other such a short time. How can you be sure? Some things you just know, Beau replied simply, taking her hands in his. From the moment I saw you standing on that porch with that rifle, refusing to be sold like cattle, I knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for. Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. Even with 3 young siblings as part of the package, Beau smiled, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. Especially then. Family is everything, Margaret. I lost mine years ago to fever, which is why I couldn't stand by and watch yours be torn apart by Flint and your father's gambling. You never told me that, Margaret said softly. There's a lot we still have to learn about each other, Beau acknowledged, but we have time for that now. So, Margaret Millstone, will you marry me? Not for show, not for convenience, but because I love you and want to build a life with you? Margaret's heart soared at his words. Yes, she whispered, rising on tiptoe to press her lips to his. Yes, I will marry you, Beau Jackson, because I love you too. 2 weeks later, under a clear Montana sky, Margaret and Beau were married in the small white church at the edge of Copper Creek. Sheriff Mills gave the bride away, her father having departed for California the day after the ranch sale was finalized. Margaret wore a simple cream-colored dress that Eliza had helped her alter, and Beau looked handsome in a new black suit purchased specially for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Margaret reflected on the strange twist of fate that had brought Beau into her life just when she needed him most. What had begun as a desperate charade to escape a forced marriage had blossomed into genuine love, offering her not just freedom from Flint, but a future filled with promise and possibility. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers outside the church, Margaret noticed a familiar figure observing from across the street. Jeremiah Flint's trial was still pending, but he had been released on bail, his influence diminished but not entirely gone. For a moment, fear clutched at her heart, but Beau's steady presence beside her quickly banished it. Flint could no longer hurt her or her family, not with Beau by her side and a new life waiting for them in Texas. The following morning, with their belongings packed into 2 wagons and Margaret's siblings bubbling with excitement about the journey ahead, the newly formed Jackson family bid farewell to Copper Creek. As they crested the hill that would take them out of the valley, Margaret looked back one last time at the town where she had known both hardship and joy. Having second thoughts? Beau asked gently, noticing her pensive expression. Margaret smiled, turning to face the road ahead, their road, leading to their future together. Not a single one, she assured him, squeezing his hand. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. And as they continued south toward Texas and their new life, Margaret silently thanked the twist of fate that had brought a noble cowboy to her rescue when she needed him most. The man who had looked at a desperate situation and declared, with quiet certainty, "Not while I'm breathing.